student in college, this is for everybody, okay? So just as a reminder, the 17-18 FAFSA, it opens Saturday, October 1st for any student who needs to complete the FAFSA for whatever school and for whatever their status is in the COTS process, whether they are a entering freshman or a senior in college, they need to do the 17-18 FAFSA, in my opinion, as soon as possible after October 1st. And again, that's for everyone, and that's also across the state. I've also heard, Mary, a couple counselors have contacted me thinking that this was just a Tennessee thing. It's not, folks. This is across the country. Yes. Remember, FAFSA is a federal document. Let's not be silly, folks. FAFSA is not going to do one thing just for us and not do it for everybody. So just understand, FAFSA, this is the new timeline. October of every year is when it needs to be completed, no matter where you are in your COTS process. The other change with the FAFSA related to the early opening is the shift to prior tax year information. So understand, guys, when your students, when your families complete the FAFSA, when it begins asking, for example, parent, in 2015, did you file taxes? That is what's going to be asked. So please understand, this 17-18 FAFSA will only ask for the family's 2015 tax information. And based on the question that I just posed, parents do have their three options. And to me, that they have to select from, but to me, there's really probably only two for the most part. For those of us who are required to file, well, we probably had filed back in April. So we would say, I've already completed, move on. And then just as a reminder, you also have the families you and I work with that are unemployed and are receiving disability. So they may not be required to file, and so they would simply put not going to file, and they move on and doing the FAFSA. Again, the point here is it's going to be asked about 2015 tax information. Later on, I'll get to a very popular question. Jason, what happens if 2015 income looks totally different than 2016? We will address that in a bit. But for now, I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is we're talking about quickly just about the FSAID. Folks, this, Mary and I talked earlier, this is a FAFSA line by line. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on FSAID, but just as a reminder, the FSAID username and password. This began in May of 2015. It replaced the PIN. So what that means, the student will need to create a username password for the student using the student's name and social and date of birth, and then a parent will need to do the same, specifically for students who are considered dependent on the FAFSA. So again, the student will need to create a username and password, which is known as the FSAID, right? Again, what is created, that username and password, that's what's known as the FSAID, and then mom or dad will need to do the same. I know, 2 weeks into FAFSA, guys, first I should say this, congratulations and thank you for what you guys are doing at your high schools. I believe we learned that 29,000 17-18 FAFSAs have already been filed.
And the first 3 or 4 in the country were from Tennessee.
Guys,
Tennessee's on top of it.
Guys, listen, we're crazy about FAFSA, and a lot of you know I'm nuts about FAFSA. But how cool is that? That per FAFSA, the first 3 or 4 applications actually filed after the application opened on midnight, October 1st. Yes. Were filed by Tennesseans, and also 29,000 Tennesseans to date have submitted the 17-18 FAFSA. That said, after two weeks of doing FAFSA workshops, I will say, for our parents, just to kind of maybe knock out these questions here, for our parents who have had older students or they themselves have been students in college, if they had a PIN, well, I'm going to say that's great, but they now need to quote-unquote upgrade to the username and password because that is what they'll need. The other question that oftentimes I get is from whether it's a counselor or whether it's from a parent is, well, Jason, I'm a mom and, I've got my kids are Mary and Jason. Mary is a COTS sophomore, so we've done the FAFSA for Mary in the past. I've got my username and password as Mary's parent, do I have to create a new one for Jason? And the answer is no in terms of as Jason's parent, because remember, folks, treat the username and password. Basically, it is your Social Security number. So in other words, when I've created my username and password, you know, depending on my role, that is my username and password for FAFSA as a student, if I am completing the FAFSA as a student, or if I am completing the FAFSA for a son or daughter, that same username and password that I create for myself now basically morphs into that's my, as parent, that's my username and password. So again, please stress, the student will need to have a username and password. The parent will need to have one as well if he or she already has one because of another, another kid that they've done the FAFSA for. They won't have to do a second username and password. All right. All right. So we'll move on to let's go back to a couple of the slides, the FSCID. Now, on the one last thing about FSCID that I did want to make note of here is, as I say, the student needs one, the parent needs one. FYI, folks, some of us do work with parents who do not have Social Security numbers. FYI, parents, if they don't have Social Security numbers, they will not they will not need to create an FSCID. And this slide just shows just kind of some tips about what they need to do in order to I guess, do the FAFSA. They do not need to create an FSCID if, again, the parent does not have a social. On the FAFSA, when their social is actually asked, they'll enter all zeros. And then finally, they'll have to do a print screen, which we'll talk about in a bit. Mary, do we have a question?
Yeah, we do have one question about will the PowerPoint be available at a later date? Absolutely. We are recording this right now, and we are going to post it on tnfafsafrenzy.gov. It will be under the resources and links section on tnfafsafrenzy.gov. And
we're also being recorded.
We are being recorded, yes. So all of us will be on there.
Guys, sometimes that's frightening with
right.
Right? No, I'm just kidding. I'll say this: it is being recorded as well. So yeah. For those of you who missed something, the slides will be available as well as the recording of this as well. So more about parents without socials maybe in a bit, specifically as we get to the signature page on the FAFSA. But again, just as a reminder, these parents. These are the one example of parents that will not need to create an FSCID is, again, if they do not have a Social Security number, they'll simply do a signature page at the end of the FAFSA. So, quick FAFSA checklist, as you see on the screen. The big thing that I'm going to encourage those of you who are soon hosting FAFSA workshops, I think the biggest thing is for our families that file their tax returns, make sure they bring their tax returns to these FAFSA workshops. You know, whether someone from my team's there assisting with the FAFSA, or if you've got a local community college or a four-year institution, or a local college access professional, you know, regardless of who it is who's helping. Obviously, you as a counselor helping. I will tell you, it's yes. A lot of our families will be able to use what's called this data retrieval tool that will link all their information. However, it's really nice when we have the tax return because if the CPA entered a wrong name, or when I say it, or a different spelling of a name, guys understand all that has to match with the IRS for the IRS to make available the data. So sometimes it's good to troubleshoot from the tax return, especially if the tax information is not coming up. And again, we'll talk more about that in a bit. The other thing along with the tax information is strongly encourage the families to bring their W-2s because, again, there's sometimes some valuable information from it as well. So that's the one thing I'll highlight from the FAFSA checklist screen. So FAFSA.gov, as you know, is the website for the free application for federal student aid. When you type in FAFSA.gov, the site will actually take you to FAFSA.ed.gov, which is the same site. Just FAFSA streamlined it a little bit several years ago. And so, again, make sure students are going to the .gov websites. Make sure they're avoiding .com. One thing Mary and I learned this morning, which is kind of great, we had one of our students in our training let us know that, and be careful of this, folks, but I am going to communicate this, that FAFSA bought the FAFSA.com URL. So in other words, if you go to FAFSA.com, it will now take you to FAFSA.gov. And actually, I saw the article, I think it was a New York Times article about it. Folks, but please understand there are still some sites out there, and I'm going to call them .com sites where students can go and complete the FAFSA. Remember, FAFSA, the first F stands for free. And I would, even though I just communicated this news about the purchase of the .com site, I would still steer all my students in FAFSA.gov and just tell them always to avoid the .com sites, but go directly to FAFSA.com. Once they reach this page, you see the 2 green buttons. I don't care which one the student clicks. Regardless of which one they click, they're going to get to this screenshot, which is the login page. Now, I know we kind of led with FAFSA ID. One thing I do encourage at FAFSA workshops, and this was a Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy workshop tip that I actually gave out this morning. For those of you at schools that can do this, I think it's really, really cool. I experienced this. I'll give Lead Academy a shout out here in Nashville. Lead was the one that did this, where their families, the night where we did a FAFSA workshop, they had 2 rooms. The first room was all about FSA ID username password creation, and then once the student and parent were both able to create what they need to create in that room, they then shifted to me in room 2 where we actually did the FAFSA. I thought that was kind of great to kind of separate those 2 things out. So that may be something, I get it, some schools you're not going to be perhaps able to do that, or logistics may not be right for that, but if you could, that was a great way to break that up. I encourage students and parents to do the FSA ID before they start working on the FAFSA. So if they come to a workshop with me, first thing I'm going to have them to do is create that FSA ID if they've not already done that. And if you're looking at the slide, you will see that there is a create an FSA ID link where they can do the, or be linked to the FSA ID page where they can create the FSA ID on this here. Mary, do we have another question?
I think you're there.
Yeah, this is my buddy Joel. Joel, I'll say this. This little screen we have is very, very tiny, so let's see if we get it. So if a parent or student used FAFSA previously, do they still need to set up new login credentials? So Joel, that's what we just covered. I think we did cover that.
Yes.
Joel, which again, if you are dad and you have previously created a username password for you for another son or daughter's FAFSA, you'll use that same username and password that you created you as dad for, say, the son or daughter who you're now doing a FAFSA for the first time this year. So again, once you create that username and password, that is yours as the parent for whomever's FAFSA that you do and are a parent for.
Jason, is it the same if you're the parent who's going back to school? Is that still your same?
It is, and Mary, I mean, this is kind of just to reiterate that as well. It is. And we have a lot of parents now where they are going back to college. So in other words, if they create a username and password for, let's use me, can we use me as an example? I'll say that. You know, let's say I'm going back to college and I've created me a username and password for my FAFSA, all right? Well, that's my username and password for my FAFSA, but then let's pretend I have a son or daughter. Then I would also use that same username and password for me on my FAFSA that I will use as my son or daughter's parent on his or her FAFSA. In that example, only the son or daughter will need to create a username and password.
Perfect. I think we saw.
Yeah, so good. So Joel, I think I explained that, but I just want to reiterate that right quick. So once the username password specifically for the student is created, then they can proceed. They can enter it here on the page and click next. Guys, here's another thing you need to maybe stress to your parents at workshops, because you and I both know sometimes it's the parent that does this from beginning to end. Always, stress. This is the quote-unquote the student's FAFSA, meaning this, that if you have a mom and dad at your workshop who's doing the entire thing, guys, I'm okay with that. I am okay with that, but please stress, this is the student's FAFSA, which means when you log in, make sure you log in with your son or daughter's username and password, because again, the first, say, 6 to 7 screens all about the student before it reaches the parent section of the FAFSA. On the next screen, once they enter their username, student will have 2 options. They'll be able to start a 17-18 FAFSA, or they'll be able to start a 16-17 FAFSA. If you're working with a student graduating a part of the class of 17, they need to do the 17-18 FAFSA. We worry about this a little bit because some students, they get confused. They're not thinking a year ahead. So this is kind of a critical, make sure that they're clicking the start 17-18 FAFSA because that's the one they need to do. The only exceptions, for those of you that have December grads or who work with December grads who may potentially be considering attending college in January, as a reminder, those would be your students that would also need to do the 16-17 FAFSA. So if you have a student like that, what you might have them to do is go ahead and do the 16-17 FAFSA, and then once they've got that done, then they'll go back and they'll do a FAFSA renewal to complete their 17-18 FAFSA as well. So as a reminder, specifically for those December grads who may be considering college in January, those would be your only your kind of exceptions to the rule that of not having to do the 16-17 FAFSA. They would need to be doing the 16-17 FAFSA in addition to the 17-18 FAFSA.
Jason, can I ask you a question? What about if, like for our TCAT students who are starting right after they graduate in May, which FAFSA should they be considering?
Well, Mary, that is a great question because depending on the TCAT and depending on their start date, some of those Tennessee colleges of applied technologies may actually require them to have to do or have done the 16-17 FAFSA. It honestly, this is one of those, it depends on, I've heard some TCATs, if they start, quote, in the summer, or let's say as soon as May, some of that might be considered the, quote, unquote, 16-17 academic year. And then where I've also heard some colleges just shift entirely to the 17-18 FAFSA year. So to Mary's question, it's one of those things for your TCAT students. I would maybe encourage the families to, obviously they're going to do the 17-18 FAFSA. Across the board, you're doing the 17-18 FAFSA. But what they might also need to do is inquire with the TCAT, hey, do I also need to do the 16-17 FAFSA if I'm doing in May, and let the TCAT answer that that specifically. Yeah. Because just kind of looking at the attendees earlier, I think I know every one of you, and you and I have worked, have worked with one another for years. Guys, y'all know this. Sometimes with financial aid, the answer is it just depends. And this is kind of it just depends, but it's something that, to Mary's question, I think it's something a student who may be looking to attend the TCAT, say in May or June, they do need to inquire to see, do I also need to do the 16-17 FAFSA in addition to the 17-18 FAFSA?
Great, thank you.
This slide just shows in this example of a student who's doing a FAFSA renewal. So for some reason, if they have previously done a 16-17 FAFSA, let's say you're working with an alum at your college, at your school, I should say, this would be the page that they would see where they would do a FAFSA renewal. Once they do that, they'll get to create a save key page. Folks, this is where simply if they are unable to submit the FAFSA in one setting, the save key will be asked for to allow the student to pick up where they last left off on the FAFSA. I typically encourage students, don't overthink this, just create a 4-digit number. This is where I used to say, when we used to have the personal identification number, this is where I would tell families to just use their 4-digit PIN. But since, again, the PIN has been replaced with that username password creation, I still use that train of thought, but instead of using the word PIN, I just say, all right, just create a 4-digit PIN. Enter a 4-digit number to use as your save key. So something as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4 will work. They get the introduction page, they can click next and move on, and then we're going to get into the actual FAFSA itself. Some of these screens I'm going to say we're going to rapid fire on. When the student logs in with the username and password, one thing you will notice is a lot of this first screen will be pre-populated for them. The one thing is a lot of times they have to enter is, are they male or female? And that's per a birth certificate. That question actually came up this morning, and I think it's important to share is especially as we begin to work with more and more students who are in transition, that as they complete the FAFSA, they must select their being male or female as it is on their birth certificate. Okay, so it's I know college admissions applications, they may be different now, but for FAFSA purposes, your sex in this case must be as it appears on the birth certificate. The other question on this page that I'll highlight a little bit is, guys, please understand I'm using some screenshots from FAFSA. So notice it says Texas. They could have just used Tennessee for us, since we're the best when it comes to FAFSA, but they chose to use Texas, whatever. But that said, when you indicate that you live in Tennessee, for example, the question that you see is, have you lived in Tennessee for at least 5 years? For our lifelong Tennesseans, they put yes, they move on. But this is important to know. If they indicate no, because they have just recently moved here, they will then be prompted first for what is your state of legal residence. Folks, if they live here, they need to put that they are a Tennessee legal resident. And then the next question that will appear is, what month and year did you become a Tennessee resident? That is very important for them to actually enter. So in other words, if I moved here in June of 2016, I need to type 062016, right? Because for Hope Scholarship purposes, we look at that specific entry to see if the student has satisfied 1-year residency requirements for Hope eligibility. So long as a student became a resident in September of 2016, by next September, they will have satisfied the 1-year residency requirement for Hope Scholarship purposes. So again, if you had a student that entered your school on September 30th, on the FAFSA, since the date is not required, it's only the month and year, they will enter 09-2016. And as they enter college next year at UT or at Vanderbilt or Columbia State, and they are Hope eligible, they would then have satisfied that 1-year residency requirement. So it's very important that they do enter the month and year that they became residents. And again, I simply say that's when they moved here. So if they moved here September 30th, they would enter 09-2016. That would then be when they became residents of Tennessee. Last question, or last thing on this is about your driver's license. Tennessee a few years ago, some of our four-year public colleges and community colleges began using the driver's license provided on the FAFSA as the means to verify in-state eligibility for in-state tuition. So if I'm working with a student, I am saying, even though this is an optional field, I am saying you need to enter your driver's license. Or, guys, please remember in Tennessee, your driver's permit or a state-issued ID would also have the same number as the driver's license. So if I have a student that has a state-issued ID, even though, quote-unquote, they don't have a driver's license, I say yes that they have a driver's license, and I have them to enter that ID number, because that ID number will eventually become their driver's license. All right? And that may be a tip that you only learn on this webinar, is that those 3 forms of identification carries the same number. Next screen, ask questions like, are you a U.S. citizen? The student will have 3 responses to choose from. Yes, I'm a citizen. No, comma, but I am an eligible non-citizen. Or finally, no, I am neither a citizen nor an eligible non-citizen. We're going to cover more about that in just a second. If you're working with a student who is male, they will be asked if they have registered with Selective Service. If you're working with a high school senior, more than likely the answer is no. Hence, another box will appear that will allow the student to check Register Me. Folks, if you're working a high school senior, before they reach the age of 18, or when they reach age 18, they're going to have to register Selective Service. I don't care what their age they are, have them check the Register Me box, all right? And that way, that's one less thing they have to worry about doing, because FAFSA will register Selective Service for the student 30 days prior to their 18th birthday. I guess the only anomaly here would be if you have like a 15 or 16-year-old high school senior, which I've seen. Perhaps that student doesn't necessarily have to do that because they won't be turning 18 during their freshman year of college. But again, just to make it easy, I just say check the Register Me box and to ensure that it's actually done, because for the most part, we're working with 17, 18-year-olds. The next question, the completion status, obviously the majority of our students will select high school diploma. If I have any professionals on here who work with GED high-set students, obviously that is an option as well, so they just need to answer that appropriately. The next question is one that we need to be super careful with. What will your college grade level be when you begin the 17-18 school year? I love all of our students, but God bless them, half of them don't read and follow instructions. Hopefully some of you are getting a laugh out of that as I say that. That said, what we need to avoid against, or what the response if you're working a high school senior is this: it's / first year college student. That is their response. Whether they've done dual enrollment, regardless if they've done earned AP credit or IB credit, done dual credit, whatever our options are here in Tennessee as it pertains to earning college credit while in high school, regardless of what they've earned, they all should select, if they're a high school senior, never attended first year, okay? Here's what we need to avoid against, and here's what sometimes the high school student will do. Here's what sometimes students will do is they will select that they're a first-year senior, a fourth-year senior. Well, that's because, well, they're high school seniors, so they think, oh, they didn't read the questions, so that's what they're doing. So they just have not read or understood the directions there. So they need to make sure that they're selecting never attended first year. Next question is also critical: what degree or certificate will you be working on? Here's what we need to avoid in this case. We need to avoid having students enter other or undecided, or that they're working on a graduate or professional degree. Right? If they're graduating, and Mary just actually passed me a note, and I'm glad we do have some Reconnect individuals, and thank you so much for joining us today. But we need to understand that if these students are working on a first bachelor's or an associate's degree, that's what they need to select. Now, guys, a lot of our students are still deciding. That's okay. So I would encourage you to either select first bachelor's and associates and then move on. We just went over this in this training we're doing here at Columbia State. Most colleges, if you select first bachelor's and end up going to Columbia State, no big deal, because Columbia State doesn't really look at that field. I think the same is true for a lot of four-year schools. What is critical, if they indicate that they're working on a graduate or professional degree, folks, they're not going to qualify for any federal or state aid until they fix that problem, because their FAFSA is going to come to college, and well, they're a grad student. Well, that means they don't qualify for Pell, they don't qualify for HOPE or anything like that. So that's again something we just need to avoid, that mistake there. Anyways, moving on. I think a lot of this is self-explanatory. This page, the foster youth question: have you ever been in foster youth? That was added a few years ago just to help identify foster students, specifically if states like Tennessee that do have some foster youth scholarships, so that we can identify these students where they may not have been being identified on the dependency question list, and so forth and so on. So on the next screen, we're going to go to eligibility status right quick, and as some of you have, a lot of you have gone through my webinars before, you've gone through trainings where I presented at. This is obviously critical nowadays: eligibility. Who qualifies for federal or state aid? Guys, we need to understand, the student must possess a valid social and either be a citizen or an eligible non-citizen as defined on this screen. The majority of us here work with green card holders or students that perhaps are here with an I-94 that is specifically designated with one of those statuses. Right? So in other words, if you've got a student that is a green card, has a green card, or has an I-94 and is designated as, say, asylum granted, then I'm going to treat that kid just like I am a U.S. citizen. In other words, he or she will qualify for state or federal aid. Let's be clear, though. If they're a green card holder, they would select no, but I am an eligible non-citizen, right, on that citizenship question. Same thing if I have an I-94 that says a refugee. I would select, are you a U.S. citizen? No, but I am an eligible non-citizen. Moving on, here are some examples of students who do not qualify for federal and state aid, and hence would select on the FAFSA, if they get to this point, no, I am neither a citizen nor an eligible non-citizen. These students who are DACA. So many of us are now working with more and more DACA students. These are the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Joel and I will see each other in the coming weeks at several national schools. You know, we have a lot of students now who have this status, and unfortunately, they're not going to qualify for any federal or state aid. Let's be clear what that means. They're not going to qualify for Pell Grant. They're not going to qualify for the Hope Scholarship. They're not going to qualify for Tennessee Promise, okay? They're not going to qualify for any federal or state aid. Sometimes I'm asked, Mary, well, because some of you know this, DACA students do, and I did not put that slide in, I apologize. DACA students are issued Social Security numbers, but and I apologize, guys. Perhaps before we send the PowerPoint out, I'll include my DACA social example slide. Okay. But as you know, some of you know this, a DACA Social Security card looks just like mine and your Social Security card, except it says valid for work purposes only on it. So anytime you come in contact with a student that has such a Social Security card, that should tip you off that more than likely this is a DACA student. And so then the question is, well, or the conversation becomes, unfortunately, you're not going to qualify for any federal or state aid. We need to look at some private colleges here in Tennessee, or perhaps outside the state of Tennessee, which may have more DACA-friendly admissions and scholarship policies than our schools, our public counterparts do. Okay, and folks, that's not me saying anything negative towards our public colleges. Folks, that's a state law right now. That's federal law, folks. So the best way to advise a DACA student is, you know, locally, give a shout out to a couple schools, Trevecca, Lipscomb, Christian Brothers down in Memphis, Maryville College over in East Tennessee. These are schools that do have, Cumberland University also comes to mind, that have some scholarships that they might can grant these students. But again, in terms of do they need to do the FAFSA, the question actually to me must be asked of the college. You know, does a DACA student need to do a FAFSA? Honestly, for federal and state purposes, the answer no, but some colleges might ask them to do it for college financial aid purposes, meaning the money that the scholarship will that the college will actually give the student in terms of scholarship. So, and then you have the alphabet soup of visas that also do not qualify for federal and state aid. Next slide, high school. This is where the student will enter high school. Here's what I want them to do. They can enter kind of just some basic information. Like, for example, yesterday I was at Hunters Lane High School. For those students, what is the name of your high school? I was telling them, just enter Hunters, and then skip down to the state and select Tennessee, press confirm, and then they would select Hunters Lane High School from the list, and it would format what FAFSA wants that to be formatted as. That's kind of my trick to this page of you know, if I'm at, you know, Gallatin High School, whatever, just type Gallatin as the name of the high school, and then select Tennessee, hit confirm. The only high school that will probably come up is Gallatin. It may be formatted as Gallatin Junior Senior High School. Yep. So once they click next, now they go to the codes screen. This is where they're going to enter what colleges they want to have their FAFSA sent to. Students may list up to 10 colleges. And the question that I'm basically getting on a daily basis right now is, Jason, I have a student that's is considering 16 colleges. How do they get their FAFSA submitted to all 16? The answer is this. They submit their initial FAFSA to their 10. They allow that to process, usually within 72 hours. And then they return, once it's processed, to make corrections. They would then have to remove 6 schools and then add 6 to get it sent to all 16 in that case. Hopefully you don't have many students like this, but that is the way you do it, all right? But folks, always remember this. You can always add schools at a later time. So even if you only add 2 schools, well, 2 months from now, a 3rd school really comes into play, you can return the FAFSA at that point and add that 3rd school in this example.
Does the order in which they add them, does that matter?
Mary, I'm glad. This is why I love Mary beside me, because these are questions that she sees as well. That's another I forget to go over. Guys, those of you that have been working with me since 2006, back in the day, the answer was yes.
Yeah.
Now the answer is, I want to say no. Here's what you need to understand, specifically from a state financial aid perspective. The first Tennessee college listed on the FAFSA, we at TSAC, that's the institution that we're going to basically designate for all your state aid purposes.
Yep.
All right? So, for example, let's look at this slide right here, and let's pretend there's another school listed. This student listed University of Iowa first, Northwestern second, University of Houston third. Let's pretend Freed-Hardeman University was their fourth institution.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what's going to happen when I receive that FAFSA at TSAC. All of the students' Tennessee state aid will be based upon Freed-Hardeman because even though it was the fourth school on the list, it was the first Tennessee college.
Mm-hmm.
So the same thing if, let's say, Freed-Hardeman was fourth and then UT was fifth.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Freed-Hardeman, for all state aid purposes, that's what we're going to lock in on. So in other words, if that student in that example ends up going to UT, that student would then have to go into the TSAC student portal, not to the FAFSA, but to the TSAC student portal to change their monies from going to Freed-Hardeman to UT in that
Mm-hmm.
example. The only reason you would need to return to FAFSA is if you need to add a school. For example, let's say you end up going to, I'm trying to pick on different schools. Let's say you end up going to Carson Newman,
yep.
right? But you did not initially add that onto your FAFSA, right? You added another Tennessee school instead. Well, in that case, you would have to return to FAFSA. You would have to add Carson Newman in order for Carson Newman to get your FAFSA. Mm-hmm. And you would also need to go to the TSAC student portal to update your TSAC aid from being sent to Freed-Hardeman to Carson Newman. So order in Tennessee, selfishly, order in Tennessee does not matter. Listen very carefully, folks. There are some colleges I hear outside Tennessee sometimes says it does matter. So again, this is where I have to say, well, it depends. I'll defer to those outside colleges if one says, well, you have to list us in your top three to be considered da-da-da. You know, if that's the case, well, you need to make sure like that school's in your top three at FAFSA. But for Tennessee state aid purposes, just understand how we do that. You can list 9 out-of-state schools first. If your 10th school is University of Memphis, that's where we're going to designate all your Tennessee state aid to in that example. All right. Let's move on. Let's go to dependency questions. This is a screenshot of all 13 of them. Most of our students, as they answer the questions, you know, it's most of them will answer no. If they're able to answer yes to any one of them, they will be considered independent, which means only their information will be needed to complete the FAFSA. The majority of students we work with as high school seniors will answer no to all of them, which means they will need parental information. My Reconnect colleagues on this call, you know, a lot of you and I, from a Reconnect perspective, we're probably dealing with a lot of independent students who might be 24 and older. So obviously, based on their date of birth alone, they will be considered independent. Mm-hmm. But for those of us in the high school setting, the majority of students will answer no to those questions, and parental information will be required. Here's some bullet points of the questions, kind of a bigger font for you. The ones I always like to highlight. The last two, actually, legal guardianship. Folks, if you have a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle, or a cousin, or a brother, sister, if per a court here in Tennessee, if they have papers that indicate that they are legal guardianship, and guys, that's just a question I would then ask in these situations. If they have a paper that says that they've been granted legal guardianship, that means the student will answer that question yes, and they will be considered independent, and only their information will be needed on the FAFSA. That's what we see most of, but please understand from a FAFSA perspective, guardianship and custody are two different things. If someone says they have legal custody, I a lot of times say, all right, does your court paper say custody or is it guardianship? If they tell me guardianship, I said, all right, let's answer yes and move on. Just FY, the college at some point will probably want to see those papers, all right? Mm-hmm. But if they actually have the papers with them and it says custody, well, that's different, folks. Guardianship or custody is two different things. For independent purposes, you have to be in a legal guardianship per court papers prior to reaching the age of majority in your state. Last thing, the homeless question. Folks, this is the one I just say FY, especially your high school counselors. If you have students that are in unique situations where they're not able to answer yes to any of those other questions, perhaps you at the school or the school district may consider them homeless or unaccompanied per that McKinney-Vento Act. So that's one of those I bold here to just say FY, that's one that's very important. To remind you of that's something that you might have control over, especially for these folks in different situations, in unique situations. Who is my parent when I fill out my FAFSA? This is a great little flow chart. I'm glad you're going to get this PowerPoint because I think you can look back at this, especially for those parents who are divorced or separated and then since remarried. This kind of gives you a flow chart of who would then need to do the FAFSA in different scenarios. Here's the big thing on this slide. Remember, your parents are none of the following. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, they will never help the student with the FAFSA, meaning their information will never be needed on the FAFSA unless they've legally adopted that student. So just as a reminder, parents on the FAFSA, unless a grandparent's legally adopted that kid, a grandparent's information will never be needed on the actual FAFSA. And this slide just reiterates that. Once you say no to all the questions, and you are considered dependent in this case, you'll get to this slide. Hopefully, the majority of our students will be able to submit the FAFSA with parental information, and this is where we get into actual parental information on the FAFSA. Notice on the left-hand slide, I know the font, the color's a little bit off here, but it's a purple color, and on the left-hand side, it does say parent. This means this is now about the parent, where all those other slides were about the student. The questions are pretty basic here. What's the parent's marital status? The tricky one here is this. If my parents are divorced and I live with my mom, and if you go back to that flow chart, mom's information is who I'm going to use. But if mom's now remarried, instead of selecting divorce or separate, in that case, mom would select married or remarried because they would then need to provide mom and step-parents information on the FAFSA. That's where that question becomes a little tricky because of how it's phrased. So just as a reminder, if your parents are divorced, well, typically it's who do you live with? Well, as you live with mom, the next question I ask is, is your mom remarried? If she is, then I'm going to say you need to select married or remarried so that your stepdad's information is also entered on FAFSA. The parent's name, social, date of birth is asked for. The first letter of the first name is asked for. As a reminder for parents that do not have socials, this is where for the social they would answer or enter all zeros. Household size, again, pretty self-explanatory. Who's in the household, right? If it's mom, dad, and 2 students, that's 4. Then how many in the household will be in college? Well, if it's just 1, well, then it's just 1. If it's 2 of those students, then it's 2, right? It's pretty easy. You also see the residency question as well. We covered that at the beginning of this webinar, where again, if a family just moved here, it is important that they be sure to indicate that they are Tennessee residents and that they enter the month and year that they became residents for programs like the Hope Scholarship. Mm-hmm. Now we get to the tax slide, and I'm looking at the time check. We got 12 minutes before we say we'll be over. I think we're good. At least I'm very calm to say we're good. Guys, this is where, again, for 2015, have your parents complete their IRS tax return. Most of our families, the answers will be already completed. 2 questions will come up. Did you file an amended tax return? Did you file a Puerto Rican tax return? If the answer is no to both of these, they'll be able to link to the IRS. And on this screen, on the next screen, once they click Link to IRS, this is where it's important to remember who did you list as parent 1 versus parent 2. If you listed mom as parent 1 and mom was the one that created that username and password, then on this screen, mom will select that she is parent 1, and then she will enter her username and password. She will click Proceed to IRS website. Hopefully we'll see this page. You'll click OK to get off the message. Some of her information will be pre-populated. This is where having those 2015 tax returns are crucial. I need that address that's entered to match what is on that 2015 tax return. So especially for families who have since moved, remember the IRS, what's on that tax return for 2015 must match what's in their system. So for example, if I moved, that's why it's important to use the 2015 tax return so that you enter that address as it appears on the 2015 tax return, especially if I have moved somewhere new in 2016. The other thing to be cognizant of here is make sure the name on this matches what's on the tax return as well. I gave the example that I encountered last week in Lawrenceburg where I was working with a mom who's per the Social Security Administration, first name on her Social Security card was Sandra, but her CPA filed her taxes as Sandy. So when we got to this tax screen, I had to make sure that she updated her first name to reflect Sandy so that when the IRS searched for her tax information, it would be looking for Sandy, whatever her last name was, as opposed to Sandra, right? So that's a little problem that one little issue could cause an issue of the family being able to use the data retrieval. Once they enter their address per the tax return, hopefully they will get to this slide, which this is showing the tax information, that they will then check the box and click Transfer Now. Once they do that, all their information will be transferred back. You notice by each box there's a transfer from the IRS. They don't need to manipulate in that information because that's directly from the IRS. The one thing to make note here, for parents who file married filing jointly, the one thing data retrieval cannot do is, Mary, forgive me if I may, I'll say this, if Mary and I are mom and dad and we filed married filing jointly, what data retrieval is unable to do, because that would have been a combined income for us, it would not be able to differentiate how much did Mary make versus how much did Dad make in this case. This is why the W-2s are important, to have those so that we can look at the box one of, say, Mary's mom's W-2, and if Mary made, $650,000, how about that, Mary? $650,000, then you would enter $650,000, and then what you would notice, it would then automatically pre-populate what I would have made. Because it does bring in that total income. It just needs to know, well, how much of that was, quote, mom's, how much of it was dad's. Once you enter one, you're good to go, all right? That last slide right quick. For some of our families, the questions will come up, what benefits did you receive? One of the new statuses is Medicaid. All right, one of the new statuses is Medicaid. So for our families who have a family member in 2015 or 2016 in this case, who, if you had a household member that received Medicaid or free and reduced lunch, something like that, you need to make sure you check all that apply. All right. Another screen of more financial information where the data has been transferred. Asset, this screen, again, more that's been transferred. Finally, on the screen, you're going to get to asset-related information. Guys, this is where the student parent may be asked, as of day, does your parent's current assets exceed X dollar amount? All right. If the answer is yes, then they're going to have these three questions that they'll have to itemize and answer. If the answer is no, then they'll be able to move on and go from there. Here's the thing. This is a good slide for you guys. When FAFSA talks assets or investments, here's what they're talking about. They're talking about cash, checking, savings, think liquid, money market accounts, 529 savings plans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What assets do not mean or you don't need to include are your primary home, your 401k, your non-education IRAs, et cetera, right? Then we're going to shift back to the student section and asking about their tax information. Again, if they've already completed, they'll put that and they'll go through the same tax retrieval like we just did. If they didn't, then they'll put not going to file. Parent would have done the same thing. If they didn't file because they were unemployed or disabled for 2015, then they would select not going to file, and then they would move on from there. Folks, understand, all of us need to do the FAFSA. We just all have different different scenarios or what have you. In terms of those of us who did file, we'll be able to hopefully use the data retrieval. For those of you who did not, you'll just, or excuse me, if you did not file, you'll just answer accordingly and you'll move on. I'm going to, because these are the same screenshots we just went through for the parent, just illustrating that same process. If they are able to use data retrieval, here's an example of that student's information being transferred back. And again, basically this emulates those parent screen, but this is again for the student in this case. Finally, we get to the signature slide. First question, are you a preparer? The answer is always no, at least for us, because a preparer is someone who charges you to do the FAFSA. So again, none of us here are preparers, meaning on this webinar or, Mary I did that in counseling, we're not preparers. We're not charging these kids to do the FAFSA. So the answer is always no. Student will agree to the statement. They'll click sign. Then on the bottom half of the page, parent will do the same thing, agree and click sign, and then they'll be ready to submit. This is where for our parents that do not have socials, all right, there is an option of other options to sign FAFSA. They'll click that button, and this is where they can print a signature page. For parents that do not have socials, they will have to print the signature page. Now follow me here, guys. Once you click that, there will be a print signature page button. You will click that. You will make sure it's been printed out. Once it's been printed out, you will make sure the student or parent submits the FAFSA, and then make sure that that signature page is signed and then mailed in to the address that is printed on the actual signature page. The parent, assuming the student is able to use his or her FSA ID, only the parent will need to sign that signature page, a parent, all right? And once you're submitted, you're going to get to the signature page, the confirmation page, which outlines the expected family contribution. As you guys know, the EFC, that is what is used to determine eligibility for Pell Grant, the Tennessee Student Assistance Award, and other programs that utilize EFC. All right. That is my contact information, as many of you know. And look at me, Mary. We started 2 minutes late, and we finished 3 minutes early. Not to say that's necessarily early, but I will say a couple of things. Mary's looking to see if there's any more questions. Looks like we don't have any. That must mean I did a really. Oh wait. We do have other questions. Guys, we may have failed a little bit here in terms of this question thing. So guys, again, here's my contact information. This screen is really, really small for us to look at right now. That may be something we want to fix for future. I think because we're satellite, I don't have Mary sometimes feeding me the questions like we normally do when we have two screens. So guys, please forgive us. If you are asking one of these questions, right now shoot me an email. I will not be replying until after 2 p.m. today because I'm at a training, but after that I will get back with you with those questions. I do want to address one thing if I'm our last.
I can also unmute folks if they want to ask them real quick.
Okay. Do y'all want to do that right quick? And for those of you who might have a little bit more longer time, we can, we're unmuting you guys if you have a question that you want to ask.
I'm going through the list. Give me 1 quick second.
Guys, any questions you want to ask right now, right quick, out loud? All right, I assume I did really good. All right, so I'm going to assume I did really a good job explaining everything. I do want to hit this right quick about a change of income because I alluded to this earlier. The biggest thing with FAFSA right now I'm seeing with parents are parents who are coming to me to say, Jason, our income in 2015 was greater than what it now is in 2016. Because, say, in 2016, there was a loss of job, someone got laid off, something like that. Guys, here's our advice. They've got to submit the 1718 FAFSA using 2015 tax information. However, at some point in the spring, as they begin, I'm going to say, choosing what college they actually want to attend, they should be encouraged to schedule an appointment with the financial aid office to discuss their situation. Some of you know the fancy term for this is a professional judgment. That's what these students and parents in this situation were. In 15, I made $80,000, but in 16, my mom, dad lost his or her job, and now I'm only made only $30,000. What you've got to do is they've got to speak with the financial aid office to see if it will consider that as a professional judgment. Now, folks, let's be very clear. It does not have to honestly help the students in that situation, but students got to meet with the financial aid office and let them know to see if it actually will. I think what we're going to see are some colleges, they're going to work with that student, and perhaps they're going to go in, the college will go in kind of behind the scenes and maybe manipulate some numbers to maybe better reflect that student's financial ability to pay. But in other examples, I could see some colleges saying, well, guys, we're sorry, your 2016 income will be reflected when you do the 18-19 FAFSA next October. And if that's the case, then you say thank you, God bless you, and move on, right? I mean, but you have to at least ask to see what happens. So, again, guys, my contact information, my email, my office number, my cell phone number, guys, you know, my work cell, that's honestly probably the best way to contact me. I do text, and if you prefer texting as your means of communication, text me. If not, email me, or if not, call and leave a message, and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Mary, as always, thank you for being here with me, and thank you for doing this webinar. I hope you guys got something out of this.
Yeah, thank you all. Just as a reminder, the slides and the recording of the webinar will be posted on www.tnfafsafrenzy.gov. Thank you all.